Hi, friends. Welcome to today's episode of We Are Marketing Happy, a healthcare marketing podcast. I am Jenny Bristow. I am the CEO and founder at Hetty and Hop, a full-service, fully healthcare marketing agency. I am so excited to be joined again today by Julia Pitlick, Hetty and Hop's Director of Marketing, and Shelby Auer, one of our account managers. Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
So we just got back from a super fun HCIC. It was at LA this year. It was super jam-packed, and I'm excited to do a fun recap episode with y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. Had such a good time. So many learnings. It's been hard to cram them all into a short little episode, but we're going to do our best.
Perfect. So let's start with a brief chat about the masterclass that I did along with one of our dear clients, Erin Williams of Cincinnati Children's. It was a 90-minute specifically on HIPAA, FTC, and state laws, what you need to know now. And I feel like this is the end of our 2023 roadshow on privacy, but it was again standing room only. We had phenomenal attendance, and I'm so proud of Aaron as a co-presenter about the level of technical detail he got into during not only the presentation itself, but also in the Q&A at the end. We had some really specific technical questions that folks got into as far as the laws and how they actually were interpreted from a technical perspective, and then implementation options. But he killed it.
Couldn't agree more. You both did an amazing job. I think what's funny about the roadshow comment before we get to Aaron is that we've been on this roadshow and the title has been What You Need to Know Now. And the content has changed and evolved every time because this topic is changing and evolving week over week. So I think that's been it's been fun. It's also been crazy to continuously update that deck. I know for you and your talking points as new points of view, as new sorts of policies and perspectives come out regarding all of these changes. So I think it's very interesting how much we've had to update this over the past couple months. But yes, I think this is probably the session, probably because of the masterclass nature where we had such a good Q&A. And you're right, really specific questions and also really specific answers from the both of you. I love sessions where you don't get answers that are, depends, which it often does depend. But Aaron, because he has gone through this journey with us, has been implementing server-side Google Tag Manager, was able to really get specific on pros, cons, roadblocks, watch-outs when it comes to implementing, and also provided some really great sort of philosophy on how they're navigating privacy as a whole.
Yeah. And I thought it was, as we were walking into the session, I know that Jenny, you and Aaron were even talking about new pieces to the equation as of a week ago. And so I agree with the content constantly evolving. It goes to show, even after we talked about a similar topic at Shishma, conversations that we were having with folks this time around and where they're at in the journey even differs from just a couple months ago. And so being able to have those more in-depth conversations with folks that are in the thick of things and trying to figure out where to go from here. Yeah, lots of good conversation. And yeah, you and Aaron did such a good job.
Well, thank you. I think for me, it was particularly entertaining. We had a couple of people come up to our booth afterwards, later in the day or the next day, and say, I feel like I finally understand technically why this is a problem and how to solve it. But then they went to another session right after and they said they could still do a lot of the things that we said you couldn't do. And so I think it's really interesting how the education and information and understanding within the industry is still evolving so quickly. And so I'm glad that we're able to be a beacon of education, if nothing else, within the industry to help folks understand how it's all working.
Agreed. We did a roundtable on this topic too during lunch, I think on Tuesday, and same thing. People were so grateful for just the clarity and the education. And yeah, session by session, some of that clarity was becoming murky again, but that's where we were really able to have some rich conversations on both analytics setup, tagging and tactics from an activation standpoint. You had so many good questions in your masterclass around how this impacts creative. We'd heard a lot around if we're doing contextual advertising in the platform, can we put out some creative about a mammogram or a certain type of service line? So it's been cool to see how cool is maybe not the right word, but how much this is impacting the different aspects of marketing. I guess it's cool to see once people get it, how they're starting to ask deeper level questions to figure out where their guardrails are within their organization.
And I loved there were certain individuals like digital strategists or folks who aren't necessarily in the weeds of these conversations that attended the masterclass and were able to be like, okay, I feel like I have a better understanding and I hear what my colleagues are dealing with and I can have an educated conversation and understand why we're going through this process. So it was really neat to see how that education was impacting, hopefully, the future conversation teams are having.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the other favorite sessions that we attended. So we did a divide and conquer strategy like we do at all conferences that we attend. So we attended a bunch, but we want to highlight a few of our favorites. So Shelby, I know you attended the session around innovative channels for health systems, specifically talking about podcasts and TikTok, which is a conversation we have so often with clients and prospects. Tell me a little bit about what you learned.
Yeah. So honestly, I ended up attending like 3 different sessions on all of these different topics. And it was really, really interesting. One, talking about the power of podcast ads. So Steve, who's a senior director of marketing at Hartford Healthcare, he actually used to be a radio host back in a different life. And so he was very passionate about radio even before he got into his current role, but talked a lot about the intimacy that we're able to achieve with radio because folks are listening to this in their homes while they're doing chores around their house, walking, running in their intimate time. So you have that captive audience and that opportunity to really break through to individuals when they're having their kind of me time. But it was interesting to hear about how podcast ads are not really being utilized to their full potential. So they talked about how individuals are spending 31% of their media consumption time with audio, but marketers are only spending about 9% of their media budget on audio on average. So there's a big kind of missed opportunity there with a lot of marketing strategies to include audio in some way, shape, or form. And they also really hit on the fact that consumers trust the platform. They have some data that like 25% of consumers, if they hear an ad on a platform, on an audio platform, they're more likely to take an action than other platforms. And I think that's really important because, yeah, we have our podcast hosts that we know and we've learned from them. We trust them. So when they're reading off some ads about certain products, I'm going to be more likely to go ahead and take an action or do some education. And they talk specifically about 2 ways that they've seen this be successful for them. One, when it comes down to specific service lines. So for them, orthopedics, they've seen a lot of success. And they did some testing with different service lines to decide where they really should do their focus. But also when it comes to geographically, there's a lot of opportunities to get really targeted when it comes to podcast ads. And so if they're launching a new service center or a new emergency department, really honing in on that geo-targeting and seeing a lot of success there. So it was exciting to see what they're doing in the podcast ad space.
That's super interesting. Like, I think even as a consumer, whenever I hear one of my favorite podcast hosts specifically talking about a product or service, in my head, I just feel as though there's more vetting going through that than whenever I see an ad on Facebook, right? Like the hurdle to get to that point of advertising and communication is bigger than just throwing a digital ad up online on other platforms. So it'd be interesting if that is one of the sources of why there's more trust, or if it's a combination of that with the podcast host trust themselves.
Totally. And the other big topic that was discussed again in multiple sessions was TikTok, right? TikTok and healthcare, we talk about as marketers that like, oh, healthcare needs to get up with the times. We're a little bit behind. And so it was really exciting to hear what different health systems are doing in the TikTok space. And I sat in on a session with Jody and Callista with Nationwide Children's talking about some of the great organic TikTok work that they've been doing, because specifically for them in the children's hospital space, young parents, young moms are on TikTok. Like the data is there. And so this is such an important platform for them to be on. And in gaining trust with leadership to get buy-in, it's like if we're not going to be there, one of our competitors will. So we need to step up and figure out how to be on the platform in an impactful way. And they did this, I think, in a couple of really smart ways. One was let's figure out ways to do an Ask a Doc series. What are the questions that parents are asking us all of the time? Let's get those questions answered in 15 to 30 seconds and roll those out. And so that's been their bread and butter as they've gotten more traction, has been taking that patient focus of how can we get those answers to those parents that are doing research and again, earning their trust, right? As they're scrolling on TikTok, they're learning, they're being calmed by the information that they're receiving from Nationwide Children's. So I think that was really, really impactful. But the biggest learning I think that they shared was when it comes to TikTok, there's opportunity to take content that performs well on another channel and move that content to TikTok. So for example, in hospitals, we're having conversations with different systems that struggle with this too, where there's negative perception out there. There's negativity talking about the emergency department, right? So during a time where they were receiving a lot of negativity, they put out on Facebook different symptoms that people are experiencing. And should you go to urgent care? Should you go to the emergency room? Or should you see your doctor? That post on Facebook went viral and they were not expecting it to. So they decided, okay, how do we repurpose this for TikTok? And I know you guys listening and you guys on the team have probably seen these TikToks where there's a word above someone's head. And if you go in one direction or the other direction based on whatever it is. So for them, they were like, okay, let's help educate on whether you should go to the emergency room or urgent care. So they had doctors in their scrubs where it's severe burn. And they're like, oh, you gotta go to the emergency room or urgent care. And they did this a couple of times. The first time, over 1 million views. Second time, 2.9 million views. They were like, oh my gosh, we're seeing such good traction from this. And so they've even iterated and done a warm weather version where, broken bones in the summer and again, severe sunburns. And they've just seen a lot of great success, but really spoke to also the challenges as they've been trying to get in a new platform. So really appreciated what they had to share.
I think
awesome.
That's a good actionable nugget. Take a topic that people need or want to know about and then adapt it to the channel, right? Like putting that exact same creative from Facebook on TikTok clearly wouldn't have worked for many reasons, but adapting it and sort of applying a TikTok meme or motif to the same facts and things that were approved, but applying them in a different creative medium and seeing that success is such a cool insight. I love that.
Yeah. And a similar thing that Broward Health, Matthew and Carla on their team were talking about TikTok, they really have some actionable insights on partnering with your video production teams when they're working on commercials, right? You might have patients, families, staff members that have so much downtime during a full day of shooting. And so really shadowing the video production team and getting those organic nuggets throughout the day that support the commercial efforts. So their oncology group were doing this I Beat Cancer series. And they ended up just getting the patient to either dance or have like the strong arm with just the I Beat Cancer with Broward Health on TikTok. And they showed it to us during the session. It was so impactful. There were tears coming from the group as they were sharing these videos. But again, just getting creative with how you're getting content. And if you're putting a bunch of money and time into certain video production, how can you pull organic content from that as well?
That is such an actionable nugget. For all of us that have been on production shoot, there is a lot of downtime. So that is such an easy, actionable thing to do. I love that. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about marketing technology. I know both of you went to a lot of sessions around that. Julia, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I'll start. The first session I went to after your master class, I want to read the title of it. It was with Val Lopez of Baptist Health and Kier Bradshaw with Merge. It was CRM and DXP and CDP, OMG, how Baptist Health effectively integrated technology to enable personalization. Like how many buzzy, exciting words can you fit into one title? And this was a session where I felt like I was late to school because I got it like right at the minute and could not find a seat. It was like sitting outside the door trying to hear some wonderful gentleman wound up giving me his seat so I could actually see the slides. So needless to say, a very, very well-attended session to help marketers understand what are all of these different technology solutions? How do they go to work together to ultimately bring to hospitals and health systems the capability to do personalization, which is something that I think everyone, aspires to achieve. We hear that the consumer and or the patient, I'll say those distinctively and separately, are expecting it. But how do you put all of the pieces together? Because achieving personalization, especially at scale, is such a technology and data-driven effort. You can put all of the right creative ideas on the table, but you cannot bring them to life in a feasible way without the right tech solutions at play. So this was a really just a deep dive into their journey across many, many years, really, where they started with their initial web presence, how they evolved to a digital front door, and then really this deep tech stack, a lot of Salesforce technology, which we know is right for some size organizations and budgets and capabilities, not necessarily achievable for some, but they really talked about what they put together to do some of that data and behavioral driven personalization. So I think that my main takeaways, in addition to just seeing really for the first time a really robustly implemented stack to drive personalization, was really seeing how they were bringing things together like call center, digital front door data, website data, CRM data to drive that personalization. So they were pretty particular about how they defined something like the phrase omnichannel, which we all like to throw around a lot, but it means 10 different things to 10 different people. They were really precise about how they defined that. And I think it's cool to see what they were able to do, what they are able to do with the technology, but they also gave some great examples for how they took such a big behemoth of a topic and broke it down into the crawl, walk, run use cases, prioritized those use cases, sold them into leadership, and started to execute. So not only was this a really good sort of technical deep dive, but also a good strategy and stakeholder management type of discussion.
That's super smart. We've seen so many organizations try to implement CRMs and they try to fix everything at one time.
Yep.
And having specific use cases for sure is a way to be able to be focused in that implementation. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. They did a great job too. And I am sometimes guilty of this when I'm talking about a technology implementation. I want to show the back end. I want to show how the data is going to flow and do the lovely sort of Visio or Lucid charts. They found, and a great learning that I want to share with our listeners, is that they took the use cases that they were trying to show to support getting this technology implemented, and they made them really visual and creative, almost took what that end goal was that they wanted to execute. What would a mammogram outreach campaign look like to an existing patient versus a prospective one, and brought that to life. So they looked much less like technology flowcharts and a lot more like creative marketing campaigns. And that, they said, was a big takeaway in terms of getting people to understand what the heck they were trying to do and then get that executive sponsorship.
Oh, that is so smart. I love it. Shelby, you attended a couple as well that you had some really great takeaways. What do you have to share?
Yeah, so I sat in a session with a couple folks on the UCLA health team, Lingo and Priya, and they talked about a lot of similar things as the session you just described, Julia, and really went in a deep dive on their tech stack, how everything is flowing, what different governance they have in place to make sure that the data is being kept safely. But they gave some very specific examples on how they have these always on audience journeys. One of those being something as simple as birthday emails that they send out, about 2,000 a day, to different folks in their system. And they get patients responding saying, thanks so much. And they've gotten really good, like about 30% unique open rate on those emails. And really, again, trying to figure out ways to not only be there in emergency for their patients, but how can we really show that we're there for them in the everyday, in those celebratory moments, just like their birthday. But they gave a pretty in-depth walkthrough of one of their audience journeys, specifically for anybody who had given birth at a UCLA health facility. And they really built this journey as a series of touch points and they treated them like the true moments that they are. So for example, they do a congrats message with also some information about setting up your first peds appointment. What does that look like? The questions that parents have. And they saw based on data that many parents, when they left after giving birth, hadn't had their pediatrician picked out yet. So they used that data to help build that audience journey. What to expect videos that differ based on the type of birth experience that you had, because they realized, why are we giving paper discharge instruction to these parents when they're leaving? Like, how can we deliver that in a timely manner and in a medium that's going to be easier for them to keep and save and share and look back on? But again, even things like if they knew that that parent had another child at home, sending a text tip. How do you play with newborns? How do you introduce your newborn to your children at home? So really made it super personal based on, again, all of the work that they did in their data stack to be able to pull in information from certain places and partnering with these different departments to help build out these journeys. So they really talk to their team that is on the ground every day with these parents of what are the questions that they're having, what are they calling and asking about. So it's really neat to see how they built that.
That's awesome. I love that. So what about chatbots? I know we talked a little bit in the booth about some of the information you were hearing in sessions. Let's talk about chatbots.
Yes. So there was a wonderful panel with 3 different folks talking about their experience with chatbots, and it was very different across the board. Cristal, who was with Renown Health, talked a lot about how they first got their chatbot up and running, and it was to help answer questions about COVID and to help fix some misinformation struggles that they were having in their community. But they've seen it be incredibly effective when sharing information about where to park. Again, what are those questions the individuals are calling about, asking about, and they're having a hard time finding it on the site? Let's make it easy for them and have it easily available in the chat bot. Alex, who's with Frederick Health, talked a lot about how the chatbot has been effective when utilizing it to push forward new branding or messaging efforts. So incorporating the language that you're utilizing in the chatbot to help it push forward any new kind of larger branding effort, which I thought was a really interesting takeaway. And Alec, who's with Baptist Health in South Florida, they have seen a lot of success in their kind of consistent iteration of their chatbot. They're at a 98% recognition rate with their chatbot being able to answer questions, which is amazing. And so they're constantly looking at what unanswered questions are left trending and on the table, and how can we modify our chatbot to help really reach our patients where they're at.
That's awesome. It's really interesting. I feel like telehealth and chatbots are 2 things that really came alive during COVID, and now folks are really optimizing them and figuring out how to make the most out of those technologies. Julia, let's talk about Find a Doc tools.
Oh, yes. So Houston Methodist, Mary Kay Boitano-Nelson and Tom Price at Houston Methodist, they gave an amazing session called How to Survive Upgrading Your Find a Doc Tool. I heard Jackie Effenson from Houston Methodist speak about this tool a little bit at Becker's, but this was really a deep dive, start to finish journey of them redesigning their tool. So I would say anybody listening that's doing some semblance of Find a Doc, find a provider, anything, go to Houston Methodist, look at their tool, because the amount of user insights, kind of agile, consumer-centric approach that they took to building this really, really shines. I think it's one of the best in class in terms of seeing how they brought insights to life to really meet consumers. They said specifically they want new patients, so they decidedly phrase them as consumers to really meet them where they are and pull them into their system to find a provider, either a primary care or a specialist. They gave a really great nugget too, that sometimes where you start off with a project isn't where you end. And they actually started off this project by taking an initiative to redesign the mobile app. And as they were doing some insights and some user research on that, it really popped that they needed to be focusing on finding a doctor first. So I think that I love primary research. I love insights. And I think that that's such a testament that if you don't go get those insights early, you may be barking up the wrong tree or not the best tree at this point in time. So they've really carried that insight-driven approach through and through. This was a completely internally driven project. So between marketing, design and IT teams. So they spoke a lot to how they got that cross-functional collaboration to really hum. A lot of that through not treating this as they're throwing requirements over the fence to IT, but really sitting and having a consistent steer code to drive all of these decisions. They have, let me make my stat right. They've launched this a couple months ago, a 51% increase in new patient scheduling from this tool. Again, just in a few months of being live. So I could see how proud they were of their work. I'm so proud of it. I think it's amazing. And going back to Becker's, I remember Jackie even saying that this tool is designed so well that they're even seeing their own providers in their system using it to do referrals, to fix some of that physician leakage. So I asked some follow-up questions about that. It's definitely something that they're looking at from a provider referral journey and how it may be able to be replicated to serve that need, which I think is just such a wonderful testament to building something right, getting that foundation right, and then letting it scale and expand from a strong foundation. So bravo to them. I'm like a Houston Methodist fangirl. I think they're doing such a great job.
I love it. I love it. And we've all done Find a Doc implementations and know how oftentimes within an organization, you're just trying to do the bare minimum, right? An organization needs one stood up. So I love that they're at the point of organizational growth where it's beyond that. It's really thinking larger and bigger scale impact across the organization. But speaking of cross-functional collaboration, Shelby, I know you have a couple of key takeaways on that topic.
Yes. I sat in a wonderful session with the Mount Sinai Health System, David and Chloe, on their digital marketing and social media teams. Talked a lot about team trust and how much they've had some difficulties, right, with leadership being suspicious of social media marketing, harboring doubts about the credibility and the actual impact that it has on the business. And I love David said this quote of change happens at the speed of trust. And if you don't have trust, your ability to innovate and move and change is going to be hindered. And so that's got to be, if that's not there, that's where we need to start, right? How do we build that trust with higher leadership? And so they talked a lot about kind of this roadmap to establish trust. But two of the big things that I think to take away, or one, obviously to be transparent, right? But not just about the positive, but what didn't work. Not being afraid to share with executive leadership. We tried this. It didn't work. This is what we're learned. This is how we're adjusting. That's how you're going to build that trust. And making sure you're not just data dumping, right? Because data is information, but what does it mean? What point are you trying to make? Don't just be sending over these numbers to higher leadership with no actual story alongside it. So they really took that to heart and they developed this whole social media HQ for the internal team on Mount Sinai that talks about trainings and resources about the different social media platforms that they're utilizing. They even have courses that the teams can take and receive a certificate that's signed by the social media team at Mount Sinai. And so when Threads came out recently, they ended up putting together a deck that described the tool, their plan to use it, how they're going to track it, and how they plan on iterating moving forward. And that's how they've approached gaining this trust with executive leadership. But they've really seen this trust open doors for them. Chloe's team grew from just a team of 1 to a team of 4 in just a few years. They've really gotten that trust, and they've been given the opportunity to really grow and fly. And they're averaging about 1,200 social posts a month now with their team. And so they're able to really expand the work that they're doing, again, because of that trust that they've built with leadership.
That's awesome. And then Julia, you have some insight around digital prioritization when it comes to cross-functional collaboration.
Yeah. So this was a session with Tara Nooteboom of UCI Health. Love Tara. She's a former classmate of mine. So I'm going to keep it brief because I could sing her praises for a very long time. But it wasn't technically an HCIC masterclass, but it should have been. She gave a complete masterclass in stakeholder management and essentially how do you prioritize a lot of competing digital initiatives and focus on the ones that can really make an impact and bring them to life, especially in a pretty cross-functional type of organization. So she's head of consumer digital strategy at UCI Health, newly created role. And she mentioned a cute analogy that I think we can all relate to, where her scope is anything consumer, anything digital, which is quite broad. So she said she has a lot of trick-or-treaters that'll come knock on the door and say, hey, can we get a chat bot? Hey, can we get an XY pick digital thing du jour, right? And so how she talked to us about how did she create some structure around that to make sure that things could be prioritized in a way that wasn't just her prioritizing, everybody could really be aligned to, and they could bring the right things to life. So she gave some quick, simple tips on collaborating internally. Define your space. So with consumer and digital, she had to get a little more specific about some of those things. She can cover anything from digital front doors to what is the right tablet OS to have when people are checking in, right? So she wanted to define some structure around that, create some structure in terms of forums. She called them her own parties or decision groups, inviting everybody. She actually emphasized over invite, make sure that you have as many people there as possible rather than having to spend the energy chasing people in back office kind of conversations, and then leveraging existing structures. So they had some internal innovation and technology resourcing practices, and she made sure that what she was building plugged into those. So it was complementary versus counterproductive. And I could go on and on. She's a gem. She's awesome at what she does. So I highly recommend connecting with her, but I'll keep it short because I know we're pressed for time.
And on that, I will just say for all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I know it's way longer than our normal episodes, but there was so much valuable content shared at HCIC. We just really felt it was important to give you the meaty highlights in case you were not able to attend this year. And I will say, please check out the show notes because we are going to be linking to all of the individuals that we mentioned, as well as any resources such as the Find a Doctor tool that we were singing praises of. So check out the show notes. And then I'll leave you with a closing comment. One of the things that Erin from Cincinnati Children's mentioned at the end of our masterclass was it's time within healthcare to really start developing your own network of folks that you can go to do experience shares and really help lift everybody. We are not competing with each other. Many of us are many of you are in completely different geographies, different specialty service areas. The odds of you actually competing for the same patient are relatively low. You start getting comfortable with the idea of sharing your best practices in a forum-like mindset where you can keep in touch on an ongoing basis. I know Aaron opened up to all of the attendees, and I'm sure he'd happy to do it for all the listeners of the show. If you're chatting, for example, in this specific scenario, if you're chatting with your legal team and they have questions about why server-side tech manager work, call Aaron, give him an email, ask him about what his case was whenever he was chatting with his legal team and why it was okay. We have the ability to help healthcare leapfrog ahead if we work together in a smart and strategic way. So let's all stop gatekeeping. All of us are in this for the greater good of the patient. So use these show recaps as a way to identify people that you want to reach out to and build a relationship with, because I assure you all of them will be happy to accept the phone call and develop a relationship. And that's it for today's episode of We Are Marketing Happy. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.